AM 1280, News Talk KIT. So glad to have you with us this morning. It's going to be a beautiful day. We want to all be in this together. Isn't that the code word for how we're living today? We're all in this beautiful day together.
Yeah, that's right. In the house this morning, always honored to have our Yakima County Prosecutor, Mr. Joe Brusic. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Joe, we had a story earlier this week. If you listen to KIT News, folks, you heard the story that the governor is calling a special session later this summer, and in that special session, he could take the power away from prosecutors when it comes to use of force investigations. So, in other words, if an officer is involved in a use of force, a shooting here, and that investigation is handled by the Yakima Special Investigative Unit, that information goes to Joe. Joe makes a decision. In the future, the governor's saying, Joe, that may take that out of your hands. Tell us about this.
Well, the speculation, and this is based upon our routine and weekly meetings since the pandemic hit over the last 3 months or so. All the elected prosecutors, most of the time we have anywhere from 30 to 35 of the 39, and we meet via Zoom. We talk about these various issues, and the one big issue that we talked about over the last couple of weeks is obviously everything going on since George Floyd's death, tragic death, in the last 2 weeks in terms of police reform, and it's bleeding into the prosecutorial reform as well. And so basically, our meeting last week, we discussed very clearly that there is going to be possibly a special session this summer to look at it. And what we saw yesterday is our governor announced a task force of members who address the issues of policing and racial justice. And in regards to police reform, the Special Investigation Unit investigations that people engage, the law enforcement engages throughout all the 39 counties. And that will eventually probably bleed into us as county prosecutors making decisions as to officer use of force cases. And what we talked about last week are a number of things that could happen, most notably, they could always stay with us as county prosecutors. There could be a panel of other county prosecutors outside the county, 3 or 4 maybe, that would review the case initially and then make their recommendation to the county prosecutor for a charging decision. Most notably, the one issue that is being looked at or will be looked at most likely seriously is allowing the Attorney General's office to make these decisions directly. Right now, the Attorney General only can make these decisions based upon either myself making that Attorney General the Special Deputy Prosecutor for Yakima County, or our Governor Inslee can ask, in fact, for the Attorney General to intercede and take over that criminal investigation and decision. And then you have the fourth possible option, which is a citizens committee making a decision. And I know there are a number of attorneys here locally that continually say that citizens should make a decision whether an officer should be charged or not. I totally disagree with that viewpoint and believe that would be a terrible way to handle these very, very serious issues. So what you have is the county prosecutors that have the authority to make the charging decision now with officer-involved use of force, and taking that potentially away from us. And the reason that that's important, or one of the many reasons that that's important, is because we as elected county prosecutors make decisions based upon the fact that people have put us in this position. They've entrusted us with this authority. And you're taking it out of Yakima County and the voters of Yakima County, because if the voters of Yakima County don't like me, someone runs against me and they vote me out. That's the power and authority that the people have, and it's sacrosanct. It is extremely important. All of a sudden now you're having an individual that is making decisions about officers within our county that they don't have the ties, not only to Eastern Washington possibly or to Yakima County. And there could be political reasons why decisions are made to charge an officer with an assault or murder, just as we've seen around the country. And now you're getting prosecutors that are making very quick decisions, not just in Minneapolis, but elsewhere, that are making very quick decisions that are, in my humble opinion, circumventing due process of those officers. They shouldn't be treated any differently in that respect of due process than a normal person that would be looked at us as being charged with a serious crime. And because of the uproar and the emotionality of the situation around the country and all the police reform issues, you're getting the system is rapidly changing right in front of us. And I hearken back and I look at the press release that our governor sent out yesterday, and he states, quote, "This work will inform legislation and help chart a path towards addressing some of these systemic and extremely harmful practices and policies that have impacted communities of color for generations." So in essence, the task force of 24 people from around the state, several of whom are representing law enforcement agencies, they're now in a position to look at his overall goal. He's already made a determination that these are systemic and extremely harmful practices and policies. I would like to see it obviously open-minded and say, okay, police reform, prosecutorial reform, let's look at it. Good, bad, or indifferent. What are the things that are good? What are the things that aren't good? What can we change for the better for all people to make the system more fair? I believe police reform should be a continual advancement of all law enforcement agencies. There's no question that police are responsible no differently than you or I for any decisions we make. But their job, once again, as I indicated last week, is so different than everybody else's job in our community. I support law enforcement because, once again, they run to the danger. They support us. They protect us. They prevent society from being so chaotic that we cannot live here peaceably and safely. And that's an important point for everyone to understand. Police reform should constantly be going through a process of self-evaluation, no question.
Perfect. I agree 100%. I don't want to use the term glacier for the pace, but glacier versus avalanche, something that's steady and ongoing versus here we've got a problem and so now we got to throw everything into the hopper at once and expect that we're going to get good outcomes when it's a mixture of political correctness, partisan politics, social media pressure, who all knows what's in this stew, when in fact you're talking about something that's very real and crucial to the lives of a civilized society, and that is a well-functioning, disciplined, and carefully reviewed police and prosecution process. And we are we're dragging it, that we're not driving the stagecoach, the coach is dragging it hell-mel across the countryside. I see this as, again, motivated possibly by the right idea, but if we're going to take local decisions out of this area, then who are the people? What are their politics?
Totally.
There's no commitment to this community where they live. It's ridiculous, Joe. And
Well, I can tell you that there are a fair amount of elected prosecutors around the state that believe that we should not arguably be making these decisions because of the conflict of interest. Remember, as a lawyer, all lawyers, whether you're civil or criminal, have to always pay attention to their ethics first and foremost. And one of the most important aspects to lawyering is a conflict of interest. Lawyers have to avoid that at all costs. And it's not just an actual conflict, it's also the perception of a conflict. So if I make a decision as an elected prosecutor of Yakima County to not charge or to charge out an officer, what are my connectivities to that law enforcement agency or even to that officer? That all needs to be evaluated. That needs to be evaluated. One of the clients that I legally represent or that I would represent in actions against the county or the Yakima County Sheriff's Office. Do I have a conflict of interest making a decision about a Yakima County Sheriff's deputy who engages in use of force? Well, some people might believe that I do.
Yeah, some people would say, well, you're on their side
That's
all the
right.
time. You're
That's
a prosecutor.
Right. And that could be a valid argument against having me make that
Right,
decision.
right.
I totally understand that. But it needs to be evaluated in a non-emotional way to look at it. And that's exactly what we did in 2018 with Initiative 940, which changed the law for the standard under RCW 9A16, which is the linchpin for us to make a decision as to officer use of force. That law is still so new that we have not had multiple decisions making determinations as to officer use of force. But yet now we want to completely overhaul the system, even though that law went through a tremendous amount of vetting. Not just law enforcement, not just through the governor's office, but through all different types of task forces and committees that absolutely looked at what should be the change. Because once again, we had the the most conservative laws concerning officer use of force up until 2018, where we had to prove, as charging an officer out, the use of malice. Was there malice involved? And it's an impossible standard. And we, as prosecutors, truly believe that we needed to get rid of that because it's exceptionally difficult to prove that an officer engaged in using malice and making these decisions to use force. But that did change, and we've got an objective and subjective standard now in I-940 that I believe really does afford us the ability to look at what the officer was seeing and observing and experiencing at that moment in time where they decided to use force, to also an objective standard. What is a reasonable officer under the circumstances going to understand at that moment to use force? And so far, the standard and the language seems to be good, and it's fruitful. But it's still so young that we're not having the ability to do it.
So, in essence, we put in the time and effort that the governor is kind of saying should take place, and we've already done it, but now we're going to change it because we haven't had a chance to test it out enough, and all these other now social pressures and what have you are in play. So rather than the system that you guys went through all this effort to work, be allowed to work, we're going to chuck that and throw a bunch of outsiders looking at the situation.
That's a potential consideration.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm open-minded to anything because all I want to do as Yakima County prosecutor is to do the right thing. I may fail, I may make mistakes, but I'm going to own them and I'm going to be accountable.
Right.
If there's a better methodology, if there's a better way to do things, I'm open-minded to do that. I just don't want to make decisions in terms of our authority based upon emotionality.
And it's like you said, you put yourself on the line in doing that. If the community doesn't feel that your decision-making is sufficient, they can take action on that. Every 4 years, they got a shot to set you out the door versus we'll have no say in what kind of determinations we get from an outside panel. I mean, that'll be out of the county's hands. It'll be handed to us, and that'll be that.
Well, when we had our meeting last week, even with a panel of 3 or 4 other elected prosecutors from other parts of the state, even on the west side, even with their recommendation and analysis, it's still going to go through the hoops of public sentiment and this backlash against being able to not only deal with officers' use of force in general, which we know is being attacked as we speak, is obviously also a decision to prosecute an individual that is an officer of the law that is trying to do the right thing. 99% of the officers that I've worked with in my career want to do the right thing. They don't want to pull a gun. They don't want to shoot somebody. They know that it's part of their job, but they understand the nature of what that force means. They don't want to be involved in this. The reality is, if it does happen, we have to look at it from the goggles of due process and what they were experiencing and what a normal officer was experiencing. Case in point, the George Floyd killing. There's not one prosecutor or law enforcement officer that would support what that officer did to George Floyd. No question. In my opinion, that was murder. But there's always a situation where an individual is looked at differently.
I'll give you an example. Wow. One size does not fit all prosecutors. You've got prosecutors in California, I'm not sure about Seattle, have said, we're not going after certain crimes, we're not doing certain things, we're not, we're going to operate in a different manner here. Well, that may not be this community standard. Our standard is set by who we vote in. They represent our standards. You make your case, and then we vote for you. You put a panel on, and you've got some of those guys from different communities with different local standards and different approaches to law enforcement. You very likely could get a different outcome than what you would if it was handled by the people who live where we live. And again, that's not a good situation for us.
Well, a majority, as indicated in the press release once again with Governor Inslee, the majority of the individuals on the task force. It states the task force includes many community members and families who have lost loved ones. Well, so they're coming in with in their belief that they've been victimized. All of which is very important. But once again, you're not.
That's a conflict of interest in determining the whether to prosecute or not.
Yeah,
that's
arguably,
prejudiced already.
And truly, in terms of police reform and under the circumstances, what we're looking at is once again trying to do the best thing, not trying to be reactionary to a tragic killing in Minneapolis, but trying to do the right thing to evaluate what is best for the 39 counties in the state of Washington, as well as the state as a whole.
Go ahead. I'll just say, you were an athlete, you played sports, you know what a makeup call is, right? When there isn't a violation, but they maybe blew one earlier, and so they're kind of, right? And those are tremendously unfair and frustrating, right? Well,
Yes.
we have a society right now that's doing makeup calls for 400 years ago, and everybody's rushing to come up with something now that somehow takes them off the hook for what everybody else is trying to make up for, rather than finding another way to move forward from this point. You can't move forward by making up for what you did in the past in this fashion. There may be other ways, but this is not the way.
Well, it comes at a tough time, and we're once again, when you use the term glacial, we're not moving glacially now. We are absolutely at light speed, and things are changing so dramatically that we're all trying to catch our breath in terms of law enforcement. The problem is what you're going to see with all this rapid emotionality, both with police reform and prosecutorial reform with some of our decisions, is you're going to start seeing disengagement from law enforcement.
Oh,
You're going to
yeah,
start
big
seeing
time.
law enforcement react in a negative way, at least to the public perception, and they'll be held accountable for that as well.
We're seeing it across the country ever
That's
since
correct.
the Ferguson effect, if you will, has put a name on it. We have seen the detrimental impact on communities as a result of that. There's more deaths out there. There's more people that are traumatized by issues in their community because officers, rather than face this new crazy world, have chosen to, well, I was in my car and my radio wasn't working or whatever it is. I'm not, it's happening. It is happening.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, yesterday morning, Sheriff Udell and myself received an email from Chief Matt Murray of the Yakima Police Department of about 6 links that talk about all the chaos and the deaths that happened even as of this weekend, we know, in Chicago. And it's out of control. I mean, the nature of the way police are being treated now and the nature of how people are perceiving them is changing the police perspective in terms of what they can do. And a lot of especially with the major urban areas, and in speaking with other prosecutors, the issue of the lack of support and understanding of what they're doing is really traumatizing law enforcement.
And I suppose that's probably you told me that a lot of the prosecutors don't want this. They don't want this decision making.
No, we have great prosecutors in the state, and they actively, Dan Satterberg from King County, Andy Miller from Benton County, they recognize that this is a potential conflict of interest. And so we're open-minded as a group representing the Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys to be able to make these decisions or not, but let's do it the right way. Let's figure out the right way. And it cannot be based upon politics, and that's the fear. Because what you're seeing across the country, what you're seeing locally, even here in the state of Washington, are politics being played out. And that's never going to be appropriate. Once again, when we as prosecutors make a decision to charge someone with a crime, we do it based upon probable cause and possible trial sufficiency of admissible evidence. We're not doing it based upon emotionality. We're not doing it on payback. We're not doing it if we should not do it if we have a conflict of interest. We have a situation where we're trying to do the right thing by charging someone with a crime, utilizing our discretion on a daily basis. We're not just rubber stamps to enforce every law. We have to use our discretion based upon the law and the facts given to us at any one time. And it's no differently with an officer-involved use of force. It's critically important that we cannot base these decisions on the emotionality of things happening around the country. And that's really I think that's a huge weighty issue for all of us as prosecutors.
One procedural question, and then we'll let you get on your way, Joe, and that is this. If you acknowledge that a person that you're personal friends with or maybe related to by marriage or whatever is the case, what's the procedure for you to say, I have to pull back from this, someone else needs to make this call because there is a definite conflict of interest?
Great question. Well, the first thing, in fact, we had this issue come up even as of yesterday. I asked 3 elected prosecutors to help out on a possible decision involving a felony charge on someone that I should and we should not as an office be making. I reached out to 3 elected prosecutors here that are contiguous to our county and was able to get that to another prosecutor outside the county to make a charging decision and then to follow up with the prosecution. It's a case that I or any other prosecutor in office should not be making, and I recognize that immediately and got it out. And that's the way it has to work. That's the way. If there's a perception of a conflict of interest, and really it's an extremely serious part of being a lawyer, in my opinion, then we have to do the right thing. We have to make the right decision, because I cannot, as a representative of the people of Yakima, have that conflict. It's not fair to the voters. It's not fair to every resident. Every resident here in Yakima County. And that's the understanding that we as a prosecutor's office should always have with the people of Yakima County, to do the right thing and to not be involved in decision-making processes where it's not fair to the individuals, not only to that individual, but to the people of the community. And I take that exceptionally seriously.
You need to know how significant it is to me to hear you say that. For years, when I was in the TV news business, one of the things that we're taught in journalism school, but has to be reminded of and reinforced in the field, and as a guy that trained a ton of young reporters, I said, our rule here is not only can there be no conflict of interest, there has to be no appearance of conflict of interest, or anything that you write, say, or do, or our organization writes, says, or does about this story will not be believed, or will provide a reason for people not to be able to believe us. And if they can't believe us, we're out of business. So, to me, and to see the national media throw that away has been particularly a source of heartburn. So to hear you pound the drum of how that's central, crucial to the legal world, and that there are good guys out there like you that still hold to that and demand that, that's a dose of what America needs to hear. So we appreciate it, Jim.
Well, our county deserves it. There's no question.
Absolutely.
And they deserve from all of elected officers and
Absolutely.
officials to do the right thing.
Amen, brother. Joe Brusic, thanks. So now you guys, what's the next step on all of this process? What the legislature got it in their hands for the special session, or can you guys intercept or head it off, or what happens
Well,
next?
the legislature is always going to want us at least to give our opinion. Whether they pay attention to it or not, as the Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, is another issue. I haven't heard when that potential session is going to be set. But we believe that it most likely will be sometime this summer, early fall. I'm on the legislative committee for the Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, and I don't miss one of those meetings. And we're actively engaging how to do the right thing and how to evaluate, once again, as prosecutors, because we as prosecutors believe, and I think every prosecutor, not just elected, but every prosecutor in the state of Washington should hold themselves to a higher standard. Always hold yourself to a higher standard to do the right thing, and to make sure you're making the right decision based upon the law and the facts, and not to do things other than that. We classically would like to believe that we wear the white hat. And if we believe that we can't process and prosecute somebody lawfully with admissible evidence, we should be the first to say we can and to dismiss that case. And so we're moving forward legislatively to try to intervene in a good way, not to try to say, no, we want the power, or no, police don't and should not be reformed if they need to be, but let's evaluate it the right way and make the right decisions on behalf of not only law enforcement, all the people of the state.